So we know that Percy's friend Bob the Titan was formerly the Titan of the West Ieptis, otherwise known as the Piercer and elder brother of Kronos. He was bathed in the Lethe and otherwise has his memory wiped away, which left him impressionable and able to be reformed by Percy and Nico. But the events of this story don't actually take place in one of the mainline books. Instead, Percy's fight with Ieptis happens in the short story titled The Sword of Hades from the Demigod Files. And since the Demigod Files are not quite as widely known as some of the other mainstream books, we want to do a full video talking about the Sword of Hades for all who might have missed it and didn't fully know where Bob the Titan came from. The Sword of Hades takes place in the winter between the Battle of the Labyrinth and the Last Olympian, putting it almost exactly a year past the Titan's curse, and it opens with Percy taking his semester English final at Good. Whilst in the midst of suffering through his Tale of Two Cities essay, Mrs. O'Leary bursts onto the stage and starts a rampage, but the mortals in the area all see her as a poodle, since she's shrouded in the mist, and Percy figures out that she's trying to get his attention. He excuses himself and follows her to a clearing on the Upper East Side along the river, and the two of them cross paths with the golden deer. Close on the deer's trail is Talia, and the two quickly piece together that they were brought together for a reason, and their suspicions are confirmed when Nico inadvertently shadow travels and meets them. At first, they are immediately suspicious that Kronos brought them together since they were the only known children of the Big Three, and even though Talia was not aging anymore, she was not technically at risk of turning 16. We do know that in the Trials of Apollo, that hunters can renounce their oaths and continue their mortal lives. At any point, Talia could abandon the ways of the hunter, and the next day, she would turn 16. Before they can figure out what's going on, the ground opens up and swallows the three of them, dropping them into the Garden of Persephone deep within the domain of Hades. When Persephone approaches them, she's in her winter form, which is desaturated and ghostly, since she's trapped in the underworld until springtime. Nico alludes to a family spat that had turned him into a dandelion, and Persephone admits that she brought the three of them together because Lord Hades has a problem, and she needed the three of them to come together and help. She sits them down to eat, but they all know better than to eat anything from Persephone's garden, so they sit still while she tells them that Lord Hades' sword has gone missing. Talia immediately picks up on the fact that Hades is not meant to have a sword, and she figures out that he's forging a new symbol of power that would upset the balance between the Big Three. Eons ago, Zeus and his brothers divided the world into their three kingdoms, and each of them forged a symbol of power to solidify their reign, and Hades' Helm of Darkness was constructed by the Elder Cycles as his premier weapon. Forging a new one on his own would create an imbalance, but it didn't end there, because the sword was being forged with one of Hades' keys. These keys could unlock and lock the power of death, which would mean that anyone who wielded the sword would have complete control over the powers of life and death. They could hypothetically sever a soul from a body with just a touch, or return slain allies to life just as easily, and a weapon this powerful would seriously turn the tide of the Titan War. This is when Persephone reveals that it has gone missing, and that the thief is currently on the loose somewhere in the underworld. Persephone is adamant that the existence of the blade is to remain secret, because if Hades' servants learned that it was being forged and that it was stolen, then Hades will look weak and risk more servants deserting him for the Titans. What's super interesting here is that Persephone says she chose the three of them for their power, but also because if the children of Zeus and Poseidon returned the blade to Hades, then Zeus and Poseidon themselves would be more hesitant to reprimand or resist Hades. It would show that he could be trusted and that the sword wasn't meant to make him superior, but it was instead to make him their equal. Talia and Percy, however, tell Persephone to shove it because they don't trust him, and Nico says the alternative is to have the blade fall into the hands of Kronos, which embodies the entire message of the Titan War. Percy has never been on the side of the gods. He's only ever been against the Titans because he knows that as bad as the gods are, the Titans are worse, and this scene is a perfect snippet of this entire argument. He doesn't do it for Hades, he does it to delay Kronos, but the three of them eventually agree to help Persephone. She gives them a sickly yellow carnation with a few dying petals, and Persephone says that the flower will always point towards the thief. And if all the petals fall, then he has escaped and the blade is on the surface world. With that, they make Persephone agree that she will compel Hades to swear on the Styx that he is not going to use the sword against Olympus, and they embark on their journey. Percy remarks that Persephone was rather uptight, to which Nico replies that it's because she hates him, prompting Nico to wonder why Nico was on the quest in the first place if Persephone didn't like him. His answer is that his father probably requested it, showing that Nico was still searching far and wide for validation and acceptance after Bianca's death. He did not have a cabin or a place at camp, and throughout the Battle of the Labyrinth, he only sought out solace in the company of the dead. Nico still does not have anywhere that he belongs, and so his desire for acceptance from his father is making him hopeful, and he specifically requested that Nico be here because Hades is all that Nico has left. Camp doesn't want him, his sister is gone, and the only corner of acceptance lies in the underworld. This scene also probably plays a significant role in why Percy requested that more cabins should be built, because Nico was a hugely integral player in the Titan War, and he would have been incredibly easy for Kronos to seduce since he had nowhere else to go. It would have been ridiculously easy to offer Nico a home in the ranks of the Titan army, and under the right conditions, Nico likely would have accepted it if not for Percy. Not a page later, we also get more depth into Talia and how she's dealing with the underworld, because at this point, they're forging through the fields of Asphodel. Percy notices that she's looking through the faces of wandering souls, and his first instinct is that she's looking for Bianca, but soon he realizes that he's wrong. He remembers that her mother died a few years prior, and as bad as she was to Talia, she died while Talia was still a tree, and the two never got a final goodbye. A while back, we did a full video on how Talia has been underutilized in the days since the original saga, and this is probably the most complex her character has been in a long time, since she's dealing with so much at once. But we got a lot more depth over there if you want to check it out. Another good point is that Talia probably believes that Jason is dead. At this point when this story came out, Percy did not know that Jason existed at all, but Talia was told that he died. So it would make sense that a toddler would end up in the fields of Asphodel, as depressing as that is, because they wouldn't have done enough to get into Elysium. But they also wouldn't have done enough to get into the Fields of Punishment. So because a toddler is a fairly blank, neutral slate, they probably would have ended up in the Fields of Asphodel. She was probably also looking for Jason, which is sad. Soon the flower veers, and instead of telling them that the thief went to enjoy some Mai Tais in the Golden Gates of Elysium with the most noble of Greek heroes, it points them towards the Fields of Punishment, where only the most wicked mortal offenders go after death. Nico figures out that if anyone would know how to escape the underworld, it would be the leading expert on cheating death, that being Sisyphus. His punishment was to roll a massive boulder up a hill for eternity. Only once he got near the top, the boulder would slip and come crashing down to the bottom, and he had to repeat that cycle over and over again. They catch him between attempts while he's cursing the gods in a fit of rage, but he believes that they are the Furies in disguise, so he listens to them. In order to get him to cooperate, Talia offers to push the boulder up the hill if he agrees to talk to Percy and Nico, and he starts by bragging about how he cheated death. He reveals that the first time, he chained Thanatos so spirits of the dead could come and go from the underworld on a whim, and this story was the inspiration for the Son of Neptune, where the giants chain Thanatos and prevent death from working properly. The second time he died, he told his wife not to give him a proper funeral, so he went to Persephone and convinced her to let him haunt his wife, only to evade his escorts and stay on Earth for another 30 years. He indicates that another demigod was just here, asking him how to escape, but he keeps dodging the subject until Nico reveals that he's the son of Hades, at which point he directs them to the cave of Melinoe. Nico clearly knows who this is, but Percy does not, and before he can ask, the boulder comes crashing down the hill, plowing into Sisyphus and almost flattening Percy and Nico. But Sisyphus catches it and resumes his curse. Based on the fact that Sisyphus had described the demigod as having one eye, Percy presumes that it could be Ethan Nakamura, who he had just met that last summer when the son of Nemesis raised Kronos. But what's even more disturbing is that Talia has trouble leaving. She tells Percy that she was convinced she could get the boulder to stay, and there was a part of her that wanted to try again because she was sure she could get it to stay on the second attempt. So they make sure to get moving while Sisyphus is yelling and cursing. They make their way through some of the terrain of Volcanic Glass, and Talia tells them to draw their weapons as a swarm of Caries swoop in. These demons are described as the battlefield spirits who feed on violent death, and it's immediately apparent that they see Hades as old and weak. They believe that he is living on borrowed time, and have sworn loyalty to the titan Ieptis, but at this point, Percy doesn't know who that is. In the midst of battle, the three of them slash the Caries with relative ease, until Percy's injured across the shoulder. He drifts in and out of consciousness as Talia and Nico finish the battle, but Nico tells him that the Caries are spirits of disease and pestilence alongside violent battlefield death, so Nectar can only do so much for him. Eventually, he will need a god's power to heal him, but they're not done yet. They speculate that the unfinished sword was able to free Ieptis from the depths of Tartarus, but this isn't officially confirmed, it's just their working theory. Since we see plenty of other titans throughout the Lost Olympian, it means that either all the titans were freed by the sword, or there was another way to get them to recover, but more on that in just a minute. They get Percy to his feet and finally get to the cave of Melinoe, the goddess of restless spirits who wander the earth. Nico says that anyone who wants to trespass through her cave would need something to barter with, but the demigod who had Hades' sword and Kronos' support could certainly work out a deal to give Melinoe whatever she wanted in the new age. Eventually, they get to the outer edge of the underworld, which is guarded by the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. The purpose of the Lethe is to wipe out the memories of someone's past life so they can be reborn as a completely clean slate, free to live as a mortal all over again. They brainstorm ways to get past, but deep down, there's only one way, and despite being injured, Percy steps up. He wasn't in good enough shape to stop the river entirely, so he rerouted it through the air, lifting the river over the heads and creating a patch of dry riverbed where they could cross. He talks about how his bad shoulder made it nearly impossible to focus, but he held it together long enough for Talia and Nico to cross. By the time he was halfway through, his concentration broke and the river fell on top of him, but as a son of Poseidon, he was able to keep himself dry underwater without much of a problem. He clawed his way to the surface and promptly blacked out again, only coming to when Talia fed him a dangerous amount of nectar. When he was finally up and ready to go again, they made their way to Melinoe, who shifts appearances based on who she is talking to. The first appearance she takes on is of Talia's vengeful mother, who is resentful at Talia for leaving her to roam the world as a restless shade. We know that Talia's mother was an unstable alcoholic, and the only reason Talia stayed as long as she did was to protect Jason. But once Jason was lost and presumed dead, Talia ran away. Even though we don't see a ton of Talia's backstory, we know that she had a rough relationship with her mother, and it's evident in the way that it still haunts her now. Nico steps forward, only for Melinoe to take on the form of his own mother, Maria D'Angelo, catching him off guard as well. It quickly becomes clear that Melinoe is much more than just the ghosts of an individual person. She personifies the regrets that each person in life has. She's not just taking on the appearances of someone Nico and Talia have lost. She is diving into their deepest regrets and hardest losses. And this is why she's choosing the forms that she does. Percy, however, doesn't have any ghosts and is able to see through the illusion. Even the friends from camp that he's lost, he's made peace with. And so he knows that Melinoe can't do anything against him. After he gets them to their senses, the last petal of the carnation falls, and Percy and the gang are faced with Ethan Nakamura and the Titan Ieptis. Ethan suggests that they run to the surface, but Ieptis wants to stretch his legs and get his revenge. So he elects to stay and fight despite not being at full power. Ieptis charges with his spear as the trio tries to fight him off and get to Ethan at the same time. So Nico summons a few skeletons to help. Talia and Percy do their best against Ieptis, even landing a few respectable blows. But even at partial strength, he's still too much for them to handle, especially since Percy is still injured from the Kyries. So, thinking on his feet, he taunts Ieptis and gets him to charge. Percy grabs him by the collar and sends both of them tumbling into the Lethe. While Ethan is preoccupied with the skeletons, Percy drags Ieptis back to shore, and when he asks who he is, Percy replies that he's their friend Bob, and this is the dawn of Bob the Titan. Talia shoots an arrow at Ethan's feet and he runs off, leaving the sword on the rocks of the bank of the Lethe. Bob asks if he helped, and Percy says yes, he did very well, and Bob responds by properly healing Percy's shoulder. When they return to the palace with the sword, they find out that Persephone lied. Hades never even knew that the sword was being forged, which is why he didn't give them the quest himself, and when Persephone tells Percy that he'd be wise to keep quiet, he directly tells her that his new best friend Bob will help him drag her to Lethe and throw her into. She vanishes, and Nico says that he'll watch over Bob, which is what brings us to the House of Hades, where Bob is working as a janitor for Hades in the upper levels of the underworld. As far as we can tell, Percy doesn't see Bob at any point between now and Tartarus, and we know that in the House of Hades that it's Nico who kept Bob up to date and told him all about Percy. This is a major point in the Heroes of Olympus series, and it all goes back to this adventure, which is why we have Nico and Bob to thank for Percy and Annabeth's survival as they trekked through Tartarus. He told Bob that they were friends, but never actually did anything to demonstrate that between the events of this story and when Bob rescues them years later. But for anyone who may not know the origin of Bob the Titan, this is where he comes from and how Percy befriended his own personal Titan. But let us know what you think of these, and if you'd like to see more types of videos covering these short stories that take place between the books. As always, we love this series, we love talking about the series, and we'd love to have you join in the conversation down below. Take care, friends, check in on your besties, and have a great one.